About morality, religion, and justice. One of my favorite chapters. I've been arguing religion all my life practically. Uh, there are a lot of people that think that you can't be moral unless you're religious, and of course I argue that morality and religion aren't exactly the same thing. Anyway, not important. Let's go ahead and get into this. Maybe. Ethnocentrism leads people to assume that their own culture's ways are better or more natural than that of others, and nobody knows this better than than indigenous people because that's the way they've been treated ever since the Europeans decided that they would treat people like they were second class or third class citizens. Ethnocentrism allowed Europeans to force their understanding of morality, religion, and justice on all the indigenous people they came across, all in the name of their definition of civilization. In 1971, Lawrence Kohlberg developed his stages of moral development. Level 1 was the pre-conventional level, level 2 the conventional level, and level 3 the post-conventional level. Pre-conventional moral reasoning suggests that people interpret morality based on a calculation of how much better or worse off they would be for acting in a certain way. Morality at this level is about trying to behave in a way that provides the best overall return. Conventional moral reasoning is about viewing actions as moral to the extent that they help maintain and facilitate the social order. This level dictates that morality is about following the rules, and individuals should not question where those rules come from. Post-conventional moral reasoning is based on the consideration of abstract ethical principles of what is right and wrong, and moral decisions are reached based on the logical extensions of those principles. Good behavior is seen as that which is consistent with a set of universal ethical principles that emphasize justice and individual rights. And of course, this is a young teenage girl, way too young to drink, and here she is trying to decide whether to chug a lug that Budweiser or not. Snary in 1985 did a meta-analysis of the 27 cultural areas from around the world that had been tested using Kohlberg's parameters. There was some universality in moral reasoning. In all cultures, there were some adults who reasoned at the conventional levels, and in no cultural groups did the average adult reason at the pre-conventional level. Evidence of post-conventional moral reasoning was not universally found. Moral reasoning based on justice and individual rights. Every urban Western sample contained at least some individuals who showed reasoning based on justice and individual rights. Not a single person from the traditional tribal and village folk populations showed such reasoning. One reason for the discrepancy between traditional societies and more urbane Western societies may be because of the educational experiences of both societies. Traditional educational practices may not include the same ideas of justice and individual rights. Another explanation for the discrepancies between traditional and Western cultures is that the two types of cultures live in different environments. Because of the harsher environment, tribal and village populations have more concerns than justice and individual rights. Schrader and colleagues in 1977 argued that Kohlberg's model of moral reasoning only represented one of the three codes that people use for moral judgments around the world: the ethics of autonomy, the ethics of community, and the ethics of divinity. Schrader and his group referred to Kohlberg's model as an ethic of autonomy. The ethic views morality in terms of individual freedom and rights violations. An act is seen as immoral under the ethic of autonomy when it directly hurts another person or infringes on another's rights and freedoms as an individual. A second code of ethics that Schrader and colleagues proposes is an ethic of community, which emphasizes that individuals have duties that conform with their roles in a community or social hierarchy. According to this code, there is an ethical principle to uphold one's interpersonal duties and obligations toward others. Actions are seen as wrong when individuals fail to perform their duties. A third code that Schrader and colleagues suggested was an ethic of divinity, which is concerned with sanctity and the perceived natural order of things. This code contains the ethical principle that one is obligated to deserve the standards mandated by a transcendent authority. Actions are seen as immoral if they cause impurity or degradation to oneself or others, or if one shows any disrespect for God or God's creations. And this is going on in India right now. They're trying to decide whether spousal rape should be punishable. Can men be arrested for raping their wives? And this has to do with all of these ethics that they're talking about. It's a patriarchal society. So how in the world can you punish men for doing what they are supposed to be doing, which is impregnating their wives? And of course, the women are all up in arms. And this is an interesting argument that's taking place right now in a society that where the two ideas are at odds with one another. Now we can look at this from our own perspective and say, this is horrible. How in the world can they even argue about this? But the reality is, it's their ethics, and they are the ones that have to decide whether they're going to stop it or not. It's India, where people have gotten off scot-free for raping and murdering women who are not, how can I say this, who are not considered morally appropriate. They have been stoned to death. I mean, this is their ethics. This is their concept of ethics. Another argument going on around the world is female circumcision. Female circumcision, of course, seems barbaric to people in the United States and people in Europe, but for people who live in Africa, it's a fairly common practice. And I'm not going to argue the ethics of it because that would be my ethics trying to dictate what their ethics should be. And of course, ethics are something that a culture needs to determine. German sociologist Ferdinand Tönnies argued that there are two ways that people can relate to each other in a group. Gemeinschaft, community relationships, bind people together with a social glue of concord, and Gesellschaft, people act as individuals and have weak binds with society. Gemeinschaft groups are characteristic of small folk group organizations, and within these groups, interpersonal relationships play an especially important role. People feel connected to one another because they feel a unity of spirit. The relationships are central to an individual's identity. Obligations associated with one's Gemeinschaft carry weight of full moral obligations. Gesellschaft are groups that are characteristic of modern Western societies and treat relationships as imaginary, instrumental as a means to an end. Gesellschaft groups are perceived as relatively impersonal and somewhat contractual, which leads to the necessity of justice obligations to govern disputes between individuals. In the Gemeinschaft, you don't have to worry about all this stuff because people do what they are supposed to do, because they are controlled by the people around them. In Gesellschaft, they have no controls. The people around them, they have very little to do with the people around them, and therefore those people cannot control them. So that's when you need a strong government. In a Gemeinschaft, you don't need a strong government. In a Gesellschaft, you do. In a Gesellschaft groups, individuals can't be expected always to behave in pro-social ways towards others because they have strong obligations toward them. So formalized rules are necessary to keep people in line. And that's in the Gesellschaft. People the world over feel a moral obligation to their community. objective obligations. People believe that they have an obligation to act in a certain way, even if there is no official rule or law that requires them to do so. Legitimately regulated, people should be prevented from engaging in moral violation, or they should be punished if they act in such a way. Ethic of divinity involves a moral code respecting the sanctity of the natural order of things as dictated by transcendent moral authority. Immoral actions are perceived to violate the natural order of things. Hunter in 1991 proposed that a culture war exists in the United States and that the battle lines are drawn between those who have an impulse toward orthodoxy and those who have an impulse toward progressivism. And of course, we're seeing this being played out right now. If you watch some of the commercials on television, they're calling Democrats dangerously progressive. And if you look at the other side's advertisements, they're talking about people that are threatening democracy. As interesting as that is, orthodox. They want those are the orthodox people, and the other people are too progressive. Religious adherents who are orthodox are committed to the idea of transcendent authority. This authority is viewed to have existed long before humans and is operating independently of people. This authority is believed to be more knowledgeable and more powerful than all the human experience. In the Orthodox view, this transcendent authority created a moral code and revealed it to human beings as sacred texts. The moral code is perceived to stand across all times and circumstances and should not be altered to accommodate any social changes or individual differences. Individuals in society are expected to adapt themselves to this ordained moral code. Adherents of progressive and religions emphasize the importance of a human agency in understanding and formulating a moral code. Progressivists reject the view that a transcendent authority reveals itself and its will to humans. They believe that humans play an integral role in the formulation of moral codes. Progressivists believe that because social circumstances change, the moral code must change along with it. In 2007, Haidt and Graham expanded Schrader's 3 moral ethics by expanding it to 5. And this is Haidt, and this is Graham. Avoid harm, protect fairness, be loyal to your in-group, respect hierarchy, achieve purity. These are the 3 they have expanded the 3 moral ethics to 5. Avoid harm. People are sensitive to any behaviors that cause harm to others. Protect fairness. They attend closely to whether resources or rights are distributed in a fair way. And loyalty to their in-groups. People are motivated to identify with their in-groups, make sacrifices for their in-groups, trust in-group members more than they trust out-group members. Respect hierarchy. People tend to respect hierarchy by admiring their superiors and believing subordinates need to act in accordance with the wishes of the authority figure. Achieve purity, reflecting the ethic of divinity. People are motivated to achieve purity and are disgusted at behaviors ruled by the carnal passions, such as lust or gluttony, or by behaviors that suggest contamination of any kind. There's a greater emphasis on faith in Christianity, especially Protestantism, than in Judaism. Membership in Judaism is defined by descent. Traditionally, one becomes Jewish by being born to a Jewish biological mother. While Christianity is based on beliefs, traditional Judaism emphasizes particular practices such as keeping kosher by avoiding certain foods like pork. The Protestant sect membership is primarily defined by beliefs. Now remember, all you need to do to be Jewish is to be born to a biological Jewish mother. One cannot become a member of a church until one publicly accepts Christian faith as dictated by a specific church and is thus baptized into that church. Christianity has fewer practices and instead places more emphasis on one's private communications with God. Reflecting the differential emphasis on practices and beliefs, a survey asked Jewish and Protestant participants how important practices and beliefs were for being religious. The results revealed that Jewish participants rated practices as more important than beliefs for being religious, whereas Protestants put greater emphasis on beliefs than practices. In other words, you can be a good Christian if you believe in God, but if you're Jewish, uh, the beliefs aren't as important as the fact that you're practicing your religion properly. Jewish and Protestant participants were asked to evaluate a story of a married man contemplating having an affair with a woman in his office. All participants viewed extramarital liaisons as immoral, but the Protestants saw thinking about having an affair as sinful as having an affair. The Jewish participants limit their moral domain to what people do and not what they think. So, as far as the Jewish people were concerned, thinking about it was okay, but doing it would be the would be the bad thing. But as far as the Protestants were concerned, thinking about it was just as bad as doing it. Distributing resources, you can distribute resources by the principle of need, which dictates that resources are directed to those who need them the most. Principle of need. Distributing resources, principle of equality, dictates that resources should be shared equally among members of a group. Principle of equity states that resources are distributed based on individuals' contributions. The more an individual produces, the more resources they receive. A social system that rewards individuals on the basis of equity principle is known as a meritocracy, and meritocracies tend to be more common in individualistic societies. They can lead workers to be highly motivated to work hard because their earnings depend on their efforts. When one worker does well, others tend to do worse. And this happened to me when I was working in the factories. This was while I was in college and right after I graduated, just before I went into the military. I was working in factories. And what happened was they put me on a machine and they wanted me to count parts. How many parts could I make in a certain amount of time? Well, I was thinking, well, I'll just make as many parts as I possibly can. And maybe I'll make more money because they told me, well, you're going to get 20 cents per part. So I made as many parts as I possibly could, and I made some pretty good money. Now, what they were doing, they were trying to set a standard. And so they were paying me more than they wanted to because they wanted me to work as fast as I could. And that's exactly what I did. I made some money. Not a lot of money, but I made some money. But then the union came to me and they said, look, what you've done is you've set the standard way too high. We have people that can't work as fast as you because they're older. They don't see as well as you do. Their hands aren't as fast. So what you've done, you've set the standard way high, or much higher, and now they don't have to pay us nearly as much money. So that was a meritocracy, and I got stung by it. And they told me, please don't do this again. Yeah, they said, please. Meritocratic systems tend to breed competition among workers, and that's exactly what they were trying to do. Distributing resources in some organizations, raises are distributed by longevity. This is known as a seniority system. Seniority systems follow the principle of equality because there is no competition between the workers. Pay is determined using the same formula for everyone, and the older you are, the more money you make. And it's kind of the same way in colleges. The longer you've been teaching, theoretically, the more money that you make. But actually, it has to do with status. So if you talk to Individual, some of the people teaching are assistant professors, some are associate professors, and some are full professors. And full professors make a lot more money than associate professors, who make a lot more money than assistant professors. And that's just the way it works in colleges. It is often assumed that merit-based pay is the way that to ensure the greatest amount of effort from one's employees. However, Japanese workers have traditionally been among the hardest working in the world. There tends to be a great deal of voluntary overtime, and many workers never take their vacations. And Japanese companies tend to have more seniority-based pay than American organizations. And they fall asleep at work. And that's perfectly acceptable behavior, because that means they'll work harder when they wake up. Social scientists have developed various economic games to measure people's sense of fairness. In the coin flip scenario, you are given $100 that has been given to you instead of another person by means of a coin flip. That's the idea. You can give the other person any portion of the $100, but they will never know that who you are. So the question is, what do? You got $100. You can take the whole $100 because you won the flip. So do you give money to the other person, even though they won't ever know that you're the one that did it? So what do? This is known as the dictator game, and there are various outcomes. Economic theory dictates that the rational person will give their invisible partner nothing, because they will never know that you are who you are, and you don't stand to gain anything from them. And this is the economic theory. Now, this is the difference between reality and business, because this is what the economic theory is what they teach in business classes. But the reality is, humans aren't like that. They don't feel that way. And this is what happened. Curiously, the economic theory almost never happens. People around the world feel that keeping all the money for themselves is just not right, and it just seems fair to give the other person some money. The most common decision that people make is a 50-50 split. So they give half the money away. This is kind of like gambling. But businessmen never do that. Businessmen very rarely give money away. That's the economic theory. That's why business people are just a little bit different. And this may be one of the reasons why we should never have a businessman as a president, because he's going to be thinking of himself. He's going to be thinking, how can I, or she, whichever the case may be, how can I make money from this? How can I get what I want? When economists found that even Western college students were making irrational decisions in the dictator game by giving away money that would not benefit them, they sought an explanation. This did not fit any economic models that they had developed. These are economists. These are business people. They didn't understand generosity. A surprise to everyone, people in the United States averaged the highest amount of money to the invisible partner in the dictator game. They gave him $47. The average $47 that they were giving to the other person. Factors that dictated the concept of fairness included the amount of calories negotiated at market for food, and being a member of a world religion, Christianity and Islam, where God observes one's fairness. And there you go. This guy's peeing in the ocean, and God is not happy about it. Another game is the public goods game. A group of 4 people are given $10 each. If the individual donates all their money into a common pool, they are all rewarded with a 1.6 times the pot, or $64, and each person gets $16. However, if one person holds their $10 out, the pot only ends up at $48, and they will each get $12. The free rider now has $22. As the number of rounds increased, the researchers found that the group made less and less money because the temptation to be a free rider was just too great. Because of this, the researchers decided to add a new factor to the game. You get a picture of this. So as long as everybody puts their money in the pot, Everybody makes $16. So everybody wins. But if you keep your money out, then not, everybody doesn't win as much. A player could now pay $1 of their own money to have one of the free riders forfeit $3. The players seemed perfectly willing to pay their own money to get another player punished. The researchers found that with the punishment rule, cooperation increased quite dramatically and remained stable across time. The researchers proposed that a key factor that allowed human cooperation to evolve was people's willingness to engage in this kind of altruistic punishment. By feeling motivated to punish those who weren't cooperating, people were able to ensure that group members didn't free ride, which allowed humans to develop norms for cooperation and for large societies to flourish. Get rid of the free riders. When the public goods game was played around the world, altruistic punishment was practiced. However, in addition to the tendency for altruistic punishment, in many societies, people showed strong tendencies for what researchers called antisocial punishment. The researchers found that some people were willing to pay their own money to punish another player, even if that player was cooperating. That's, of course, antisocial punishment. The motivation for this antisocial punishment seemed to be largely a function of revenge, in which people would punish a player who had punished them on a previous round. Although this tendency for antisocial punishment was negligible in the weird societies, that's Western societies, in other societies, this behavior predominated. Antisocial punishment dominates in Oman more than any other country. Punish the bad guy, or the guy that you think is bad. Antisocial punishment predominates in Greece as the second highest level measured. Antisocial punishment predominates in Saudi Arabia as the third highest level measured. Okay, so we have 2 Arab countries. Antisocial punishment predominates in Russia as the 4th highest level measured. The notion that punishment promotes cooperation holds true only in societies characterized by norms for civic cooperation and high levels of trust. Antisocial punishment was entirely unexpected by the researchers who first discovered it, but it appears to be quite commonplace in many cultures, and it remains somewhat puzzling. Now remember, the economists thought that they should keep all the money. The economists would, I don't know. I'm not sure what the economists would tell you to do. To be a free rider every time, I guess, would be what the economists would assume. The researchers' data show that societies with weaker norms for civic cooperation and a weaker rule of law engaged in more antisocial punishment in public goods games. Other researchers argue that antisocial punishment can be adaptive in contexts where the rule of law is insufficient. In dealing with a system that can't always be trusted to function, people come up with alternative ways to ensure that their needs are met. In Brazil, there is a complex sociocultural strategy termed Yetinbo, the J is pronounced as a Y, by which people manipulate or dodge the official rules to achieve things, and that's acceptable. This is a picture of people taking a test in Brazil. And as you can see, in order to keep them from doing Yetinbo, they have those sheets of paper stapled to their foreheads. A real-life example of these weaker norms for civic cooperation can be seen in the game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And of course, this is a really popular show. When Regis Philbin was alive, he was the host. It started in England. In the show, which was originally created in England, contestants were able to use a lifeline, and they could poll the studio audience for help in answering a difficult question. So there were various ways that they could get the right answer. One of them was to poll the studio audience. When Who Wants to Be a Millionaire was introduced in Russia, the contestants quickly found out that they couldn't trust the audience. Frequently, the audience members would deliberately choose the wrong answer in an apparent effort to mislead the contestants. Not unlike the public goods game, many members of the Russian audience seemed to be more motivated to sabotage the play of contestants than to help them. As the Brafman 2009 brothers have said, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russians became suspicious of those who were trying to profit off the hard work of others. Norms of civic cooperation remain relatively low in Russia and many other societies around the world, which makes it more difficult for governments to band citizens together in cooperative ventures. This is a member of a group known as Pussy Riot in Russia. They are a protest group that has been outlawed in Russia. Most of them live either in the UK or in the United States, but one of them is in prison right now. And there they are again. You can listen to them if you like. This is a member of the group during the World Cup. And there they are. They have been outlawed. There were 6 of them, and I think 3 of them live in England, and 2 of them live in the States now, and 1 of them has been in prison for the last 5 years. And there you go. I was going to play a song by them, but if I do that, of course, copyright laws and whatnot. Okay, so I'll talk to you again next week.